Join the Imam Shamil Library Discord server. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Deism is the belief that a God exists, but does not interfere in his creation in any way. This belief system emerged during the Enlightenment period, where Christianity was being heavily scrutinized and the corruption of the church led many people to be skeptical of theism in general. For the purposes of this video, we'll be assuming that the deistic God is monotheistic and has a conscious mind. For evidences as to why God is monotheistic, see my video on polytheism. As to why God has a conscious mind, see the arguments in my video on atheism. The first point that should be addressed is that deism contradicts the idea of God's wisdom. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya, the 14th century Islamic polymath, describes divine wisdom as encapsulating God's desired ends of his creation and commands, for whose purpose he created and legislated. In other words, God's wisdom is the aspect of his knowledge that wills the enactment of anything which furthers the objectives and goals God set out in his intended act. Reason leads us to believe that God is both exceedingly, if not infinitely, powerful and knowledgeable. As human beings, we know power to be the capacity to fulfill a certain end goal, and certainly the existence of this entire universe demonstrates that God has the capacity to do so. Thus, God's exceeding power is demonstrated. We also know that this universe consists of many complexities, intricacies, and laws down to the smallest atom, which seem to all work together in an organized fashion. Thus, God's exceeding knowledge is demonstrated. These two attributes are essentially undeniable for someone who grants that God with a conscious mind created this universe. It is very obvious that if one looks at creation and recognizes that a God exists, the amount of evident intentionality behind observable phenomena. One of the biggest evidences for intentionality is explainability. In other words, the notion that the thing in question can be demonstrated to have a reason for the way that it is. Indeed, science as an entire field must presuppose the fact that all empirically verifiable things have explanations. For, if we were to assert that certain observable phenomenon exist without any explanation, it would no longer require analysis and thus fall out of the realm of scientific endeavor. Take a flower, for instance. Each and every one of its organs serve a distinct purpose that is recognized by scientists. The roots absorb nutrients, the stem keeps the plant sturdy and allows for internal transportation, the petals attract pollinators for reproduction, etc. This is not only a demonstration of intentionality, but also precision and mastery in God's creation. Islamic scholar Ibn Taymiyyah argues that this precision and mastery not only demonstrates God's exceeding wisdom, i.e., the aspect of God's knowledge that wills the fulfillment of his intended goal, for example, to allow the flower to reproduce or allow earth to sustain life, but also shows that God has a clear purpose behind each and every one of his creations. Thus, it follows that believing that God created this universe and humanity for no reason at all clearly conflicts with God's exceeding wisdom. The deist may argue that God may have just created this earth for entertainment or boredom, and claim that this is a quote-unquote purpose. However, this statement demonstrates a failure in comprehension. The argument is not about any purpose. It's that God created a universe that is in line with his exceeding wisdom. If God just created out of boredom, we would not expect to see any precision and intentionality in observable reality. To the contrary, the precision demonstrates that God's actions were purposeful. And if God created human beings for a purpose, then no doubt God would have an interest in seeing that purpose fulfilled. For example, from the Islamic paradigm, God created human beings solely to worship him, and in order to see which of them will do good and which of them will do evil, in order to reward them accordingly. He sees that this purpose is fulfilled by sending prophets and revelation to guide humanity, as well as giving us a Fitra, also known as natural predispositions, regarding the divine. I will go more in detail on the Fitra shortly. Perhaps the reason that deism is so unpopular on a world scale is because it also contradicts one of the most remarkable driving features of humanity, that is, the drive to discover truth and purpose in everything around us. For if we are to assume that God created humanity and just let them be without any purpose, there would be no reason for him to have created us with the inherent drive to discover truth and purpose in all matters. Even more damning is the fact that each and every human being was created with the Fitra to believe in and worship God, and to avoid evil and embrace goodness. The fact that belief in God, tendency to worship God, and good and evil duality are intuitive in human beings is established by the field of psychology. So is the belief in an afterlife. These realities seem to demonstrate that if a God does indeed exist, he is not distant from his creation, but rather wishes to give us a head start in the right direction and find the truth, and by extension, the true religion. Ultimately, even on a purely pragmatic level, deism fails to achieve anything other than the nihilistic chaos which atheism and agnosticism entail. For, if determining morality was left purely to the subjective worldview, morality would be nothing more than flavors of ice cream, which is a disturbing proposition at best. Furthermore, the lack of a purpose and defined afterlife drives men deeper into the pit of nihilism and depression. Studies show that theists are statistically happier than irreligious folk, and that is by no coincidence. As Muslims, we invite deists to pursue the natural human drive to discover truth. Investigate the world around you and its various philosophies, and no doubt a sound mind would conclude that Islam is the truth. Finally, I would like to suggest reading Bassam Zawari's paper titled Critique of Deism, linked in the description. It's a very good read on this topic. That's all for now. See you guys later, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.